Dear sisters and brothers, from the last 2 Sundays, we have been hearing from the Sermon on the Mount in St. Matthew's Gospel. This Sunday too, we hear another portion of the Sermon on the Mount, that is Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 to 37. It's a continued reading. Today's text could be divided into 4 parts. Part 1 is an introduction, that is verses 17 to 20. It presents principles with which the rest of the 3 parts are to be interpreted. Part 2 is running from verses 21 to 26. Part 3 verses 27 to 32 and Part 4 verses 33 to 37. In the introduction, verses 17 to 20, Jesus presents himself as one who brings the final and definitive revelation about the will of God. In the Old Testament, God had revealed his will to men and women through the law and the prophets. That is, God revealed what they were to do, and therefore the law. Now Jesus declares the purpose of his coming, of his being sent by God the Father, that is to bring perfection or completion to the law and the prophets. In fact, by the coming of Jesus, nothing of the law and of the prophets is abolished or rejected, nor is the law simply confirmed. The whole law of the Old Testament is brought to completion by Jesus. In Jesus, it reaches its climax. In the letter to Romans, St. Paul says that Christ is the end of the law. Romans chapter 10 verse 4. It means that Christ is the destination or goal of the law. In the expression, "but I say to you," said several times in our text today, Jesus speaks with the authority of God. Jesus tells as to what is the behavior that conforms to the will of God. Then in the following 3 sections, Jesus gives some examples of the law being brought to its fulfillment and accordingly how men and women are to behave. Therefore, here in the second part, this is verses 21 to 26, it deals with the overcoming of conflicts. In its most radical form, a conflict is resolved by eliminating the other person. But the Old Testament condemns such a solution with the prohibition, "You shall not murder." But there are other modes also of resolving conflicts, of being angry, causing injury, or attacking, or even causing injury by words, etc. But Jesus does not approve of these ways too. He condemns such behavior. It's necessary to avoid not merely wicked acts, but wickedness of the heart and wickedness in words. Conflicts should not take away love from one's heart. Conflicts should not make the heart venomous. Conflicts should not make the community poisonous with words. Here, Jesus is not making a mere recommendation. He is thinking in terms of an obligatory law, if one should become his disciple. Conflicts should not in any way take away the primary love of neighbor. Even the resolving of conflicts should not just be taking away or avoiding of evil, but should lead to the proactive way of reconciliation. With the small example given in verses 23 to 25, Jesus gives the positive way in which reconciliation should be effected. Jesus says, "So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser. while you are on the way to the court with him, or the accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Now, in this case, if the sacrifice itself has to be suspended or kept back, then the importance of being reconciled is very much emphasized. It has priority even over sacrifice. Going to the court signifies that the matter is urgent, but all the more urgent is the need for reconciliation. Therefore, this part deals with the need for reconciliation, which is the part of love of neighbor. Then the third part, that is verses 27 to 32, deals with behavior towards women. At first, it deals with behavior towards other men's women or wives in verses 27 to 30, and then one's own woman or wife, verses 31 and 32. It's not right to seek sexual pleasure with another man's wife. The Old Testament had forbidden adultery. According to Leviticus chapter 20 verse 10, adultery was to be punished with death. What is implied is that nothing which goes against the marriage bond of another person should be done. Marriage, as the church defines it today, is a communion of love and life. Anything which goes against this communion or harms it should not be done by anyone. Here, Jesus goes to the root of sin. Jesus is setting a new scale of values. In the first part, he spoke against anger, injury, bad words, etc. Now he considers even desire for sexual satisfaction with another man's wife as sinful. The exhortation to tear off the eye or cut off the hand, causing one to sin, shows how great this value be. That is, how much one should take care to live up to the value of marital chastity. In fact, the cause of sin is not the eye or the hand, but the whole person. It's therefore required that the person should know how to control one's senses and use the senses with responsibility. The second case is that of behavior towards one's own wife or woman. In the Old Testament, it was possible to divorce one's wife with a certificate of divorce. But here too, Jesus sets a new hierarchy of values. He says, "It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." This is a translation taken from the New Revised Standard Version. In fact, as the communion of love and life between the spouses is unique and inalienable, no one should touch it. Unity and indissolubility are the two fundamental properties of marriage, and they cannot in any way be compromised. The marriage bond has to be considered with great concern and care. Here, the absolute prohibition of divorce from the part of Jesus, as seen in Mark chapter 10, verses 11 and 12, and Luke 16:18, and 1 Corinthians 7, 10 to 11, are to be brought into. But the exceptive clauses here in this passage is problematic. But what is implied is not that one can divorce one's wife in case of adultery. The unchastity, translation of New Revised Standard Version, or fornication, translation of New Jerusalem Bible, here ought to be understood as marriage contracted unlawfully without having known about it at first. In that case, the marriage has not taken place as there was already an impediment. Therefore, the NAB, New American Bible, which is a Catholic edition, or the NABRE, the Revised New American Bible, has this verse translated as, "But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless the marriage is unlawful, causes her to commit adultery." So, the exceptive clause here is understood as unless the marriage is unlawful. Now, the fourth aspect here in this gospel passage concerns the relationship to truth. That is Matthew chapter 5 verses 33 to 37. One should speak only truthfully. There should be truthfulness in one's words. There should be transparency, honesty, and truthfulness on the lips of the disciples of Christ. A Christian should not diplomatically say both yes and no together or at the same time. He should not also say half-truths according to circumstances and situations. Half-truths can at times turn to be lies, causing loss and harm to others. One should not also call God to one's side in order to uphold incorrect and false statements. That is, false oath-taking in the name of God should not be there. It will be punishable. Dear friends, Jesus sets new scales of values in these teachings that he gives in this portion of the Sermon on the Mount, which we hear today in this gospel passage. Every egoistic tendency is to be avoided by a Christian. One has to respect one's fellow man. Chastity has to be cultivated as a virtue, respecting others' women and one's own woman. For marriage, it's a communion of love and life. Every type of behavior should promote brotherhood and love of one's neighbor. Amen.